Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today I just kind of wanted to take a little closer look at Texas A&M. Right, the Aggies, obviously you remember their last season, right? 11-0 to start the year, really dominated teams. Now there was the point of, they were playing the weaker teams in the SEC, but really up until they started losing at the end of the year, my opinion was, those teams have some more losses because they're playing A&M, which is true to a certain extent, but then, you had that blip against South Carolina where they were down by, I think it was 27 points at half. Even though they came back and won that game, that raised the red flags of, this team has it in them to potentially collapse. But then they survived that game, but then you go to Texas the next week. You lose that game to Arch Manning and the Longhorns. They haven't gotten over that Texas hump in a few years here. And then obviously in the playoff, right, you were one and done against Miami in that 10-3 loss. So it really was a sour end of the year. But A&M dominated for 10 weeks. They dominated for 10 weeks, right? They were the best team in the SEC for a while. They were the highest ranked for really most of the year, as high as number 3. So a lot of what is being remembered about last year for A&M is just the ending of it, right? And that makes sense, right? Because it was the most shocking, it was the most jarring for fans of other teams. You want a good team like A&M to be bad, so they're not a threat to you, and it's just the most recent thing that you saw. And in terms of narrative pushing, you saw Marcel Reed not play very good in those games, so that's what people want to hold on to for a lot of reasons, especially the Miami game. Carson Beck's stats were miserable in that game too. Granted, I don't think very highly of Carson Beck, but if you remember the wind in that game, Miami missed 3 field goals. I think A&M missed one as well. The ball in the air was a crapshoot all game long. I don't have anything against Marcel Reed for his passing performance in that game. And there's a bit of a broader strokes touch on Reed, right? Last year was his first full year as a starter. If I had just asked the general public, right, not really A&M fans, how long has Marcel Reed been starting for A&M? People would probably say 2 years. Maybe somebody would even say, "Oh, he's entering this is his 4th year, right? So he's been starting for 3 years." He has not been a starter for that long. He's just been impactful for several years in spots where it feels like he's been around forever. This is only his 2nd full year as a starter. Quarterbacks deserve that degree of grace. Now, in the same breath, there is also a fair expectation on Marcel Reed to elevate his consistency as a passer. Right? He's a really good runner. The deep ball is good. The deep balls are solid. Can he be more consistent with his reads? Pun. Can he just be a little more consistent over the middle? In third down, have to have it. Can you make a clutch throw over the middle to the sideline? Can you do that? Because last year, 62% completion rate needs to be a little bit higher. Right? Especially when you're in those games late against Texas. 2 picks in the 4th quarter, I'm pretty sure. That just can't happen. Right? So it's cleaning up some of those things when you get into the biggest moments. And I think he's in a good spot to do it this year, right? I mean, the receiver room, the offense around him is really, really good. You have Mario Creever coming back, your lightning bolt in the slot. Isaiah Horton is a big guy at receiver. The running game, I probably have more questions than A&M fans do. And I'm not saying that in terms of bias. I'm just saying that in terms of really taking a close look at this room because Ruben Owens, really good, very solid runner. Behind him, I had some questions because I believe Tiger Ryden is not going to play this year. Now I believe he's injured for the year. But Jamarian Morrow, he looked really good in those scrimmages. He looks like a lightning bolt. So if that can turn into, not just scrimmage and practice clips of look how fast this guy is and turn into you're a really good football player who we can count on, that'll be a big time step up. Really where my question comes for A&M is defensively. And it's because they lose so many stars from that defense last year. Most notably, it's Cassius Howell coming off the edge. And he was the best edge rusher, arguably, at least in the SEC last year. Just one of the most productive defensive linemen. And you look at other pieces on the defense as well. You're replacing a bunch of stars with good players. But I do question, are they going to play to that same level? Or are they just going to be good players, right? Speaking of the Cassius Howell replacement, it's Anto Saka coming over from Northwestern. He had 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. But if you watched anything A&M and you saw a player interview and you thought like, oh, wait, that might be the D-line coach. And they said this is a player, but this goes 6'35". That's Anto Saka. This guy is a grown man. He has all the physical tools, but can he up his production? At linebacker, Ray Coney's coming in. He's coming from Tulsa. He had 128 tackles last year, really productive, 2 sacks and a forced fumble. Does he elevate that performance to the SEC? Damian Sanford, he got hurt in the spring game. It looked really bad, and granted, it was really bad, but I think they'll have him back decently early on in the season, actually. And then, Ricky Gibson at corner. He transfers in from Tennessee. He only played in 1 game last year. I think only half of 1 game against Syracuse. Then he was injured the rest of the year. So he's a really talented guy. How does he come back from missing all of last season? Is he ready to go in week 1? So The talent on A&M's defense is not a question, right? And I'm a big Mike Elko guy. I really do trust what he's doing with his team. I believe that the staffing around him is very good, but defensively, can those new players live up to the standard that the guys from last year did? And you go back to the offense real quick, right? Colin Klein is gone. He was their OC last season. He took the head coaching job at Kansas State. So they promoted from within, right? So that does take a little bit of the questions of, brand new scheme, all this, yada, yada, yada. It will look decently similar just because it is a promotion from within. There will be some nuances to it, a couple of different pieces, but it's still a different guy, right? It's still no longer Colin Klein. And you can have your questions about Marcel Reed. Maybe at times, A&M's offense looked a little bit stagnant. Klein was still really good at his job, right? Because coordinators who are bad at their job don't get power for head coaching jobs. Colin Klein did. He's really good at being an offensive coordinator, right? Even if there are spots where he doesn't look perfect because he's actually a human being. So what does A&M's offense look like without Colin Klein? Right, with a new guy calling the plays, with new guys in Marcel Reed's ear after a pick, after a 3-and-out. What is that dynamic like on game day? Because that can be a really big part of it. And looking at their schedule for A&M, you have a decent launching point, right? Missouri State and Arizona State at home in their first 2 weeks. Then conference play hits with a home game against Kentucky. Week 4 is that first big test at LSU. For the Tigers, they're coming off of that Ole Miss game. So they're going to be really emotionally worn down, maybe also physically worn down. Really, whichever way the Ole Miss game goes, that could be a massive chance for A&M on the road. And then your next two, Arkansas at Missouri, next three, excuse me, Arkansas at Missouri in the Citadel. 7-0 is looking you in the face. It really is. At LSU is by far the hardest game. At Missouri can also be sneaky tough. I'm pretty high on the Tigers. If Ahmad Hardy is back and going, but then that can be a really tricky game as well. But those first 7 games, they're not the worst thing in the world. And they're at least much better than your back 5, where you're at Alabama in week 8. Then you have your bye, but then it's at South Carolina, scared you last year. Home versus Tennessee, Faison Brandon at that point, how good is he? At Oklahoma, really good defense, and then home versus Texas, who's been biting them. So A&M schedule, it evens out with most of the rest of the conference in terms of challenge, but the first half of the year is your much easier half. Every coach in the country wants that to be the case, right? Because even if you're not starting a new quarterback, you have good experience, which A&M does. You still have that runway to start playing your best ball in October. For those new pieces, for your new OC, you have that runway to get comfortable, maybe face a little bit of adversity, but not adversity against Bama on the road. It's adversity against Kentucky at home, right? Those are very different situations. So A&M's schedule works out very well, where they have plenty of chances to beat really good teams, and they play enough good teams where 2 losses wouldn't kill them when it comes to the playoff. But it all happens late, where if you're playing your best ball going into and coming out of your bye week in week 9, and you just go 3-1 over that last stretch of 4 games, you can buy a loss against Alabama or against LSU and be 10-2 and go to the playoff. My prediction for A&M this year, right, that win total's at 8.5. I think that's more where I have them. I think it's because defensively you have a bunch of talent. I just don't know if it's going to be the same level, right? I don't think you can just plug in anybody. No disrespect to Anto Saka. I don't think you can plug in anybody for Cassius Howell and get the same level of production, right? And offensively, I'm a Marcel Reed believer. I want to be a Marcel Reed believer, but I have to see it. And with a new OC, I have a couple more questions. I think that the situation around him is good. The offensive line situation, there are much worse, right? There are much worse OL situations to be in for Marcel, but I kind of have to see it. And once again, I talked about the easy runway into the most challenging parts of their schedule. That's going to help him too, right? Even though he is a redshirt junior, he has that experience. That easy runway will make it easier for Marcel Reed to get comfortable, really show his development, and get to prove it to the outside world, also to himself to a degree, right? Against some SEC squads before he gets the teeth of that schedule. A&M's going to be good. I just think that with some of the turnover on your staff and on your roster, they might just be a step back from where they were last year, which is really good. And they'll still be a very good team this year. They'll catch some really good teams. They'll beat some really good squads. I'm just not quite sure if it's another playoff year for A&M this year, but I do love what Mike Elko is doing in College Station. I believe he is, without question, the guy, right, to either bring A&M all the way to the top or have them right there for years to come. I just think you look at this year, might be a slight step back, mainly because of defense, but also just losing Colin Klein, I believe is going to hurt them a little more than a lot of people might be prepared for. So that'll do it for a little state of Texas A&M here. I just want to dive into that roster because I think it is so interesting and so full of talent, but there are a fair share of questions I want to really delve into. But college football is 2 days away. We actually have FCS games tonight as I'm recording this on Thursday. I will be watching those, and I'm going to love every second of it. So if you do want college football content, SEC content every single day, subscribe to me on YouTube, follow me on podcast everywhere at Tailgate Talk SEC. I'm on Twitter at Will Thomas CFB. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode, and I will see you next time.